has been covered brilliantly by our brother Yusuf. I think Yusuf is certainly one of the inspiring young men of our generation. I have known Yusuf for a while now, and I have heard him speak on other occasions. We've seen this PowerPoint presentation, and I think I must commend him for it. What I would like to speak about is why we should be against the FIFA World Cup. It's not a popular stand at the moment, as Brother Yusuf has said, when the national euphoria, in fact international euphoria, is for the World Cup. But we thought we should say in a few words why some of us in this country have a different view. And that view is not only shared by some of us here in the Natal, KwaZulu area, but it's also shared by people in the Gauteng, Western Cape, and the other parts of this country. We know, for instance, that the Anti-Privatization Forum also has a view similar to ours. So, in a few words, I'd like to say these things. One of the quick and immediate reasons I have against why we are against the FIFA World Cup, one little personal matter. For instance, right now I'm standing and I suspect the onset of fluish conditions. And months ago, in fact weeks ago, I had been to the pharmacy to ask for a vaccine, a flu shot, which we had been encouraged to take, and they said, sorry, there are no vaccines. And the reason for that recently, about a week or two, I read was that the government had allocated all the flu vaccines. They're taking them off the market. It's becoming very difficult to get all of the vaccines because they are now only for the use, and they're giving free shots to the thousands of policemen, army personnel, medical personnel, all the organizers, volunteers, and so on, who are involved with the FIFA effort nationwide. So that, in a way, is to say, well, let's keep the organizers safe from these conditions, and the rest of the populace, this is part of the medicine we are withholding from you, and your punishment already begins. My submission is that with the hosting of the FIFA World Cup, this government has taken us onto the route which is a direct betrayal of the electoral mandate. At the time of 1994, indeed, already by 1990, as Brother Yusuf has said, we've had a situation in this country where we were already fast becoming, if not already were, the second most unequal nation in the world, unequal country in terms of the economy. Even Thabo Mbeki, during the course of his presidency, want to talk on there being two nations, one of the rich and one of the poor. So this is not something that they were unaware of. This is something that was part and parcel of the neo-colonial setup that we had become since 1994. So knowing this, what we have now and what has been amply demonstrated to us in the PowerPoint presentation is a betrayal of the electoral mandate, and I'll tell you why. We had emerged after 1990, 1994. I keep talking about 1990 because for me that was a very important phase, a very important period for us, with the unbanning of organizations and with the freeing of a democracy in this country. In other words, we who had fought for freedom in this country all through the various generations thought that 1990 was going to usher in a democratic dispensation, which would mean the voices of ordinary people would be heeded to by our rulers, that our rulers would not be cast themselves in the mold of the pharaohs, as Brother Yusuf has mentioned. We've come out of an apartheid legacy. An apartheid legacy meant that we were already in a state of deprivation, in a state of inequality, in a state where there was a shortage of housing, health services, education, you name it, there were two worlds, one where the rich could afford and the other of poverty. And in between there were people who were just about making do. Add to this, the onset or the emergence of democracy also meant that the floodgates to this country were almost cast open. Our borders were no longer as tight as they used to be in the days when the Boers or the soldiers of the oppressors ensured that nobody infiltrated across the borders. That all went by the wayside, so our populations virtually doubled. I think there was a time when the census people thought that our population was about 36 million and got a rude wake-up call when the calculations indicated that it was closer to 43 million. Already for purposes of planning, you've had to be looking at additional millions of people in this country. Now, all of this is the kind of scenario which perpetuates the cycle of inequality that we've had. Part of the betrayal of the mandate we saw very early on, in the early 90s, or is it in the late 90s, sorry, when we had the arms deals, the numerous arms deals which were already going to cripple us, which were already being castigated, was already being denounced by social workers, activists, political thinkers, academics, and so on, who were saying then, and the statistics were showing then, that with what was punted as being a low cost of the arms deal, I think some smallish figures of about 30 billion and so on, which gradually then began to increase to about 40 billion, and your guess is as good as mine. Many people think that with the escalating costs and the crash of the rand against the dollar about 8 years ago pushed the prices closer to about 60 billion. Whatever it is, we are talking billions, which for me to try to get my mind round, somebody was trying to work out the 100 rands and 1,000 rands. It took a long time to try to work out what 1,000,000 rands is. Against that, we're now going to look at billions, and billions are already 1,000 million. And every time we talk about billions, we're talking about 1,000 millions multiplied by whatever figure we are putting across. That's a lot of money, and we'll come to the implications of what this kind of money means to us. So the arms deal, which is in the ballpark of about 60 billion, and we've already seen, already then, there was issues of scandals around it. There's already issues that arms were being sold to us which were obsolete in other countries, but were coming to us now with the FT price tag. People were sending off their rejects to us, and one feared that even as one bought these things, they were either going to be obsolete or they might be counterproductive for the needs of a country which was not at war with anyone. A country which is already ravaged by poverty and everything else that was. The sociologists were saying to us then, at around about 1999, that if the money for the arms was spent on alleviating poverty, on taking care of the inequalities here, South Africa would have got rid of poverty as we know it. That is what they said then, that if this money had been redeployed there. But no, soon after that, hot on the heels of that, this country is obsessed with wanting to bid for everything. If it's the Olympics, they must have a piece of it. They must be it. If it's the FIFA World Cup, they've got to be part of it. Whatever it is, they've got to be in it. And of course the craze is, not only must we have it, we must become the best at it. We must be the number one. Our stadia, as we know now, they want to put it as being the best in the world and so on. Whether it is, it's another question. But that is the kind of craze, that is the kind of disease which has caught the leadership of this country, that we've got to have it all. Now, whether it's tennis, whatever, you'll find Sutcliffe will tell you that no sooner has the World Cup been over, we will bid for the Olympics. And I think indeed, after they lost the last Olympic bid, they went immediately for the FIFA bid. That is the kind of situation we have. Now, with the stadia, we've got the building of the stadium and the figures that are going around from about 32 billion and so on to about 40 billion rand that's been spent on all of these things. Even the Moses Mabhida, which was originally put in at about 3.1 billion. My calculations last year when I was monitoring the municipality budget was that it was going closer to 4.1 billion or so. There was actually a spend, an officially admitted spend of 500 million rand extra. Half a billion extra had been spent already last year. They projected that the stadium, the Moses Mabhida, would cost half a billion. And I did an additional calculation from what the figures could tell us, that with all of the other upgradings they were doing in and around the city, over and above what had been budgeted for, there was going to be another half a billion that was going to be spent. And this I'm not saying only to you. I've written it in my submission to as comments to the annual report and to the budget, the eThekwini budget. I wrote this and sent it over to Sutcliffe as well as the Treasurer, indicating that we are aware that they are now deploying, reallocating expenses which should have gone from our rates and so on, which should have gone to uplifting and upgrading our city generally and the populace generally into the stadium area, that little enclave of the stadium. So you could add another billion to that. And what we've seen in the last few months makes me think that even that has been surpassed. Because I myself and many of you have been witnesses to roads, pavements which were in perfect condition being dug up, being retarred, resurfaced, repaved virtually in a certain designer. It all looks very beautifully. But as somebody says, you know, it's like your child or like a family member. It's not, you can't have everything that you want to have, that it's nice to have. You've got to look at what is affordable. Can I afford to have this? It would be nice if we could all drive Mercedes Benzes, but our budgets may not allow for that. So we've got to tailor our own budget according to what we can afford. Or if we can all want to wear designer suits, we've got to cut that suit according to the cloth we have. And that is the realities, and this is an age-old thing. It comes from the biblical times as well. We know of these things. But, you know, when you play around with public funds, it's quite easy then to use other people's money to indulge your own wants and desires. Now, this does not, and people, a lot of people, if you talk to Sutcliffe, and I've heard him many times say, well, it's only going to cost us another billion or so, from the city is only paying for that. Most of these costs are coming from the provincial government, or it's coming from the national government. The truth of the matter is that whether it comes from province or national, it's coming from the people, it's coming from our taxes. We can ask ourselves the question, and we know the answer to it. Those of us who have had our homes revalued will know that our homes have been obscenely revalued at a higher cost in order that they will then attract a higher rate burden on us. Our rates shot up. In many cases, and there will be people in this room, will tell you that they now pay 3-4 times what they would have paid. They are paying rates on market values which have been deemed by an evaluator, a suspect evaluator, and these values would not stand up to scrutiny. They would not stand up to the market itself. In other words, if your property is valued at 2.36 million, you may be lucky to get 1.5 million for that property. But this has an impact on what the city can extract from you as rates. And that rates has to pay for all of this. Indeed, before the World Cup was pitched, and before the costs of this World Cup were reasonably public, in the public domain, the finance minister, Trevor Manuel, previously was telling people year after year what magnificent surpluses this country has got. Every year the country was collecting more than its budget. There was a budget surplus. Now the reason any salesman will talk to you about somebody selling you insurance or selling you a product is going to tell you can afford it, brother. Don't tell me you can't afford this stadium, or don't tell me you can't afford this party. We can afford it because we've had budget overruns, we've had surpluses, and so on. Year 1, year 2, year 3, they tell you the story. On the 4th year, the center doesn't hold. In the 4th year, the reality hits home that in fact we don't have money. We now got to go to the IMF and World Bank to get money. That in spite of the budget surplus, which the new Minister of Finance has proclaimed, this country is still in a deficit situation. They've had to go to the World Bank to get, if I can't remember the figures now, whether it's 30 billion US dollars or something, but they've had to go and get additional funding. This very city itself has had to, in the last 3 months or so, indicate they've had to go and cap in hand to ask for $500 million. And come again to that $500 million that I spoke to you. That $500 million indicates to me that it's a direct budget overrun from the cost of the stadium. They've had to go now to go and get loans. So the city is now in debt, or will soon be in debt, to that tune. And you and I and our families will pay that, will pick up the tab. Well, if the city is in debt, we are in debt. We pay for it. And the political leadership will manipulate their budgets in various ways to ensure that certain sections of the population will pay. Already the population is in revolt. The upper middle classes, the middle classes, and so on, and even the lower middle classes have been in revolt against having to pay the rates burden. I've heard Sutcliffe at the last budget presentation and his treasurer confess that everything was not right with the rates burden, the way they had shifted it, that indeed a lot of people were now disadvantaged. Sutcliffe himself has been saying we've been severely handicapping older people, pensionable people, or people on pension who are now saddled with this bill. So it's almost like confession time now. They are saying these things, but we will have to see in the coming period what this means in terms of the budget. I've already spoken about the diverting of resources from the nation building and from building the state and alleviating poverty and so on into this big celebration of the FIFA. And FIFA, we are told, is the greatest show on earth. In order to host the greatest show on earth, it's the ordinary people will pay in so many ways, even those who are not of the middle classes and so on. Even the proletariat, the working people will pay, and they'll pay in many ways, from having vaccines to getting sick and so on. We've had the Eskom debacle. We've had the chaos with Eskom. And the fact that Eskom itself has had to go and get money indicated that the budget surpluses that Trevor Manuel was boasting about were all taken away in one clean sweep, in one fell swoop, as it were, by the FIFA operations. So Eskom, for the building of those power stations, and we know that the building of those power stations were not for the benefit of you and I in the main, because the major consumers of power in this country are the big corporations, the multinational corporations, the Arca Metal steel giants, the Billiton, and the various mining corporation, Anglo-American. And the big companies are the biggest consumers. And I think the figures are being put out is that, one, they consume about 10 times what we do, whereas the ordinary people consume a fraction. And I think the general populace in this country, the general population, all of the people put together, consume only about 20% or so, maybe even less than that, of the power generated. The bulk of the power is being used by the corporations. So when the new power stations are being built, and we are expected to fund it, it's being built for the purposes and the needs of the big corporations. So bear that in mind, because the city, for instance, has pushed a 25% increase on power for this year. In the coming years, it will be anything between 25 and 30% for the next 2 years, because that's all been approved by NERSA, which works hand in glove with Eskom. On the rates issue as well, we've got a situation where, I've said already, we've got rates that are going to go up. We can expect that to be up. We've had just some little examples. For 2010, we've seen buses here that I think there have been about 54 buses, the press tell us, that have been bought, each at 2 million rands each. And these are to be used by the football clubs, SAFA, FIFA, and so on. 54 purchased at about 2 million rands each. Various school grounds where the soccer teams are to play or to train and so on have been revamped. And many of these soccer grounds, we are told, are having facelifts of about $1 million rands plus to returf them and so on. And the obscenity is some of the stadia that we've seen, which has got this huge price tag, have had the fancy turf put on. And that was not up to FIFA requirements or soccer requirements, and they've had to be redone. They had to be lifted off and new grass planted. Now, all of this shows you the diversion of resources and money. Now, from the standpoint of the early morning market and the street traders and so on, and Faith will talk about it later, is what we have as the economic cleansing of our city areas. The economic cleansing meant that all of the traders from the Warwick area, from the beachfront area, as well as the city centers, were to be moved away from these areas which are closer to the stadia and from the pleasure spots, so that for about 7 weeks or so they would be out of trade. But what they decided, that with the Warwick area, they would use the opportunity of the World Cup to demolish once and for all the early morning market, and use the opportunity of FIFA, of the World Cup, of funds for it, to do the demolition. As you know, that matter is still being struggled for. I think the latest media reports I've heard indicates that the World Cup profits, which are estimated at 25 billion rands, are not going to be here in this country. They are going to go back to Switzerland or will go back to multinational corporations. So that's a repatriation of whatever profits that this would make. So whatever was meant to be a South African World Cup for South Africans to benefit and so on, we are seeing that they are now confessing that a lot of this is not going to happen. The slogan that they had, that if South Africa wins, we all wins, we can now see it's FIFA wins, the multinationals win. I just want to look at, just point something else. With the building of the Moses Mabhida Stadium, we were told by some people that it was not really a FIFA requirement that new stadia had to be built everywhere. It was not a requirement.